Hey, welcome to Faith Church. I'm Jeremy Vance. I'm one of the pastors here, and I just want to say thanks a lot for coming to worship with us today. If you're new here, we have a gift for you out here at the welcome desk. It's a choice between two books. One is written by our very own Pastor Brian Schley called Centering Your Home on Jesus. It's about putting Jesus in the center of our families, and love for you to have this book if that fits you well. Otherwise, I wrote a book called John, Jesus, and Me. It's a book about how to have a personal relationship with Jesus and how to invest in that relationship and what you can expect from a relationship with Jesus. And so I'd love for you to have a copy of this. So make your way out here to the welcome desk and just say, hey, I'd love to get that gift that you're offering to me. I'm kind of new, and we'd love to get that into your hands. Well, before we go into the sermon, there's just a few announcements that I'd love for you to hear before we hear the preaching of the Word of God. Thanks again for coming.
Well, I'm wondering if you'll be one of 127 million or so Americans in 2 weeks and tune into the Super Bowl, the most watched event of the year. And I know many of you are probably tuning in for the game. Doesn't matter who's going to be playing, but you're just football fanatics. Yet there's probably a big chunk of you who are tuning into thank you for the two of you who went in, the commercials. Yeah, this is a big deal. Like the commercials. I mean, that's what we watch, right? To see like what's going on, all these new things get unleashed. And so I looked up the commercials, the price to get into a 30-second ad this year, $8 million that a company has to pay to get a 30-second ad. But that's not all. And so if you dig down deeper for the amount that these companies have to pay to get the commercial into that, not just into that slot, but to create it, to pay those actors and actresses, and to do all that, to cut it up, to get into that spot, their total investment into this is somewhere in the range of $20 to $30 million for a 30-second time slot. So I asked the question, like, why would somebody do that? Why would they pay that kind of money? Well, the answer is because they plan on getting more in return. How do they plan on getting more in return? By us buying their stuff. So we'll see a lot of stuff. No doubt there's going to be food, drink, clothing, vehicles, all sorts of things that are all vying for our attention. Why? Because they're hoping and banking on us going out and buying those things either now or in the future. Because they're like, hey, they're going to try to make us laugh, they're going to make us cry, they're going to do whatever they can to pull on our heartstrings to get us into that so we have some sort of positive feelings towards their brand. And then when we go shopping, we're going to be like, oh, I want that. Well, we're this captive audience. And so they'll pay that much because, again, it's the most viewed thing in the year in America. And so for 4 hours, we are held captive by these commercials that are trying to tell us, like, hey, this is who you should be, this is what you should be eating, this is what you should be drinking, what you should be wearing, what you should be driving. There's all this comparison that gets in. They're putting all this in our face. They're giving all sorts of pressure, this cultural pressure that we will feel, so that we step out there and say, I need that. That's what I'm about. I'm going to buy that. We get cultural pressure from commercials. We get cultural pressure from our neighbors, and whenever they come home with something, from friends, from family members, from scrolling and seeing ads on our phones, from all sorts of ways. We're going to get this kind of cultural pressure to figure out ultimately what our allegiance is going to be towards. What are we buying? What are we investing into? Where's our heart going to go into? So if I flash back half a lifetime ago into my early 20s, like, man, I love the cultural pressure because I would do all sorts of stuff to be able to figure out, like, how can I, like, live the dream and live the best life? Like, I'm pretty confident there were very few college kids who had a boat at that time, but I was one of them. Why? Well, because I had this theory that said, hey, banks have tons of money and they just keep wanting to give it to me. I couldn't afford it, but the banks could. And I found out with student loans, not only do they cover tuition, but they give you this, what we call a change check at the beginning of each semester. I mean, they'll help you cover like all your costs for rent and room and board and housing and food and all this stuff. And they would give you up to a certain amount. And I'm like, well, it only costs me this much to live, and they're willing to give me this much more? You know what I can do with that? Buy a boat. So I did. And so then I meet Tiffany, we get married, and so now we're entering this relationship where we have multiple student loans, and within there some boat loans and car loans and all sorts of debt. And I'm so grateful as I look back for one of our first small groups that we were a part of. Because our small group leaders, they taught financial class at church. And so our small group dove into the finances and hey, there's the cultural way of doing things, which we are all signed up to do, and then there's God's way of doing things. We were hooked into the culture. And it's like, no, you don't have to wait. You can have it now. People called us dinks. Like, now's the time to do it. You're a couple of dinks. Dinks, double income, no kids. Like, you're prime. Like, buy it now. You've got nothing to worry about. Just pay for it. Like, it's all good. And so we fell into that trap. And then pretty soon it's kind of like, well, man, the bills pile up. And you're like, we got to pay this stuff back. It's fun to drive and it's fun to use now, but this is feeling like it's a burden. So we get into this and they're like, well, God's way says some different stuff. God has priorities a little bit differently. And so as Pastor Jeremy talked last week about snowballing, we learned about that, and so we did that. And we got on a trajectory to go, hey, put a bunch of money towards this one loan, and then when that's paid off, you dump it all into the next and into the next. And we set ourselves on this path to become debt-free outside of our home. And so we just started to restructure things. And as I look back, I'm like, man, I'm so grateful for those conversations. And because as I look there, I'm like, you know what? You don't know unless you're taught. You don't know unless you dive into something a little bit different. And we were in a spot of, we just didn't know any better until we invested and investigated into something different. And so we've been in this series for 4 weeks called Financial Freedom, where week 1 we talked about having freedom from control, being like, God, it's yours, it's not mine. And it's this heart posture that we shift. And then we went into freedom from anxiety, of trusting God with things and not putting all this pressure on ourselves. And last week, Pastor Jeremy talked about having this freedom from this burden that can start to pile on us when we're in debt and just a weight of things that it can feel like. And this morning, we're going to talk about freedom from cultural pressures. From this idea that we're gonna keep up with others, that we're gonna have comparison, that we're gonna just be influenced by these 30-second commercials to live a certain way, to be a certain way, to do a certain thing, to eat a certain thing. And that's one way of doing things. And then there's God's way of doing things. And so for you keeping track at home, we're going to be all in the P's this morning, mainly because it helps me process through things. So we're going to talk about the pressures. So we're going to go to the book of Proverbs, and we're going to anchor in there. And there's going to be 4 things that we're going to do, that we're going to investigate, that all start with the letter P, that is going to help us to be able to figure out, man, God, how do we do it your way? If I want to find financial freedom, how do I do it your way? And so the first one is going to be priority. We're going to have our priorities in line. And so in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 through 11, it's going to give us an indication about what our priority should be. Honor the Lord from your wealth, and from the first of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. When the readers of this would have understood this in the Old Testament and the New Testament times, they would have got this. There's this farming culture, this harvest culture. And when it's talking about honoring the Lord with the first of your produce, it'll be like the first fruits, or some will say the tithe, meaning your first tenth. So they say, hey, when the harvest comes, the top 10%, the top tenth of that harvest, the best of the harvest goes to God. They say we honor God with that. And this word honor means it's like weighty, significant. And it's saying we're going to put the weight there. We're going to put the significance about honoring God. and we're going to trust him with it. And so he's saying, honor God with our wealth. And wealth here, others still translate it substance. It's like whatever you have. It's saying whatever God gives you, we honor him with that. Because sometimes we can get this idea of going, yeah, when I get to here, when I hit this much, when I get to somewhere else, there's this future date that says, oh, God, I'll honor you then. But it's saying, no, the significance, the weight of it says we honor with what we have, with the substance, with the wealth that we have. From the first of all our produce, the first of it, not the last, not the leftovers, but the best stuff. It says, and when we do that, we're ultimately trusting God with the rest. And so it says, when we honor God with that, when we have him as our priority, then your barns will be full. We'll have plenty in our barns. We'll have safety there. We'll have security there. We'll have our daily bread. We'll have enough from our barns. And even so, our vats will overflow. And now the vat's overflowing. This is the idea of making wine. So all the grapes would get put in this basin. And those grapes would get pressed down, and the juices would flow down into this vat. And it's saying the vats will overflow. When we prioritize God, then our vats will overflow. We'll have not only just enough, but we'll have even more so. And when we have him as our first fruits, when he gets the first of our produce. And Tiffany, my wife, was reminding me just this past week about a rebuke she gave me early in our marriage. Now, before I get to that part, let me give a little backstory to maybe soften a blow on myself a little bit. So we have this thing where when we're eating together, oftentimes, like, let me give you an example, like chili. Now, she doesn't eat the beans in chili, so she takes them all out. So what happens is I get a double portion of beans. Now, I know that she's setting that stuff aside. She's not going to eat it, so I shuffle it into my bowl, and I'm eating that. So now, we've had some situations where we've gone to eat at like a Mexican restaurant. And now, let me guess, here's a time that I had to correct her. She ordered once, and there's guacamole on the menu. And she tried telling that waiter to hold the guac. I don't want that. I'm like, whoa. You certainly want that. When that comes, that plate is getting shifted over to me. Like, this is God's blessing in my life. Like, this relationship is I get double guac. I'm not only dealing with your chili beans, but I get the good stuff too, all right? So, like, you don't hold that. You bring it on. And so now this is the blessing in my life. I understand there's things that she doesn't want, and from her plate, it transfers to my plate. She sets them aside. So she reminded me of those early days in marriage that she would often set things aside. And now I've got two things going against me at this point. One of them is when I see that she sets stuff aside, in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's for me. She doesn't like that, so I eat it. The other thing is I'm a natural grazer, so if you're in my home and you've got something on your plate, I'm probably just going to try it. And so those two things hit me in the wrong way, as I found out, in particular when it comes to desserts. So, for example, when Tiffany would be eating a brownie, everybody knows the best part of the brownie is the edges. So she'd be like setting those aside. I'm walking by, I'd be like, ooh, sweet, I love those. And I'd be eating them. And for a while, she just, served me as her loving wife and would let me do that until finally she corrected me and said, you know why I set those aside? It's the best part. I'm saving it for the end. Would you quit eating the best part from me? And this is what God is doing with us. He's giving us all of our wealth, all of our substance, and he's saying, now would you take, not what's left over, but would you take the best part and give it to me? But yet when we cut it out, when we set it aside, we better protect that, because there's all sorts of pressures that are going to come and try and take that from us. So we have to be protecting of that. Go, God, I'm giving you my first fruits. I'm giving you my produce, and I'm tossing it up to you, because you're my priority. And I want to honor you. I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to show you that my value is in you, because wherever our first fruit goes, that's an indication of where our heart is. That's an indication of what we value. It's an indication of what we trust. And so we prioritize him, and we put our first fruits there. And this goes in the face of our culture. Our culture would tell you, hey, honor you. You do you. You save for you. You spend however you want. You do it with whatever you want. And the Bible flips it up and says, honor God first, then let him take care of you. And let him provide. And trust him with whatever's left. So we prioritize God. And we trust him with what's going to be left over. And so now as we build our peas, we're going to get to this point where we're going to continue to build them, and it's going to be very actionable. There are going to be a lot of action steps. And so if this first one is the priority, I'm going to say, how do we do that? How do we have an action step with this? So this one I think is easy. I think we can look back at last month's statement and say, have we set our priority on God? And if the answer is no, say, do we want to do that? And then how do we start to put steps in motion so that way we can honor God with our first produce and not our leftovers? And I'll just tell you, from our vantage point, what we had to do, because I know myself, is that early on when we started figuring this out, we had to set in just an automatic payment to get taken out of our account on a regular basis. And just right after the paycheck would come, we would have it taken out like the next day, because I wasn't going to leave it for chance. And now I know that's not for everybody, because some people would say, hey, actually, it's an act of worship for me to grab cash. It's an act of worship for me to write the check, because now I'm reminded of it, that this is where it's going. And so there's freedom in this. We can do these things however we want. The idea is just, how do we prioritize God? How do we have Him as being the foundation of all we do with what He's given us? So step one, prioritize Him. Step two, then we move to our provision. These are our basic needs. It's like, think of food, clothing, shelter, those types of things. Now, even when I say that, I'm going to say there is a range within there. I mean, if we think of food, I mean, there's some easy, cheap meals. There's some pretty expensive things going out to eat can cost. I mean, with clothing, there's some easy, cheap ways to be clothed. There's some expensive ways. Transportation, housing, all of that stuff. There is a range within provision, and there's freedom within that to figure that out too, as long as we're wrestling through this stuff with God. And I just know that within this context in particular, there's a question or a statement that I always have to go back to with myself. Here's my heart check. Like if somebody's like, hey, Brian, how you doing with your finances? My go-to answer would be, well, I've got less than I want and more than I need. That's just me. My nature is to go back to that 20-year-old guy who's like, well, there's so many things that I want. I've got less than I want. And at the same time, man, I've got more than I need. All my provision is met. So how do we live within our means? And even in many ways, how do we live below our means so that we have freedom to be able to spend in other ways? I'm going to jump down to Proverbs 30 and go into verses 8 and 9. Pastor Jeremy touched on these last week, but I want to hone in on these again. The writer says, keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, so that I will not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? And that I will not become impoverished and steal and profane the name of God. This writer's having this prayerful moment with God. And he's saying, God, this is so important that I maintain a relationship with you. The most important thing is that I'm connected with you, that I have this dependence on you. And he says, and there's two things that will pull me apart from that. One is if you give me more than I need. The other is if you give me less than I need. God, if you give me too much wealth, then I'm likely to go, I don't have a need for you. Man, look at what I'm doing. Look at what I've accomplished. Look what I've got. Things just come easy for me. I've got more than I need. I've got all sorts of stuff. So I accumulate and accumulate. Then we have no need to be dependent on God. And so he's like, God, don't give me that, because that will break our relationship. And he says, God, don't give me too little either. Because I'm just guessing this guy, he's like, if I go hungry, if I look at my family and they're hungry, I'm going to get desperate. And I might go and try and steal. I might go and try and provide in some illegal ways. And you know what that's going to do? That's going to tarnish your name, because people know who I follow. And God, I don't want that either. I don't want to do anything that's going to break relationship with you. I don't want to be sinful because of that. So God, would you just give me my portion? Would you just give me my portion? Would you just give me enough? Would you just give me all that I need? So the portion is, it's measured. It's a limited quantity. It's to say, I don't want more than I can handle. I don't want less than I can handle. I just want enough. It's like the prayer Jesus taught his disciples. Give us today our daily bread. And that's what he's praying for. He's like, I don't want more than that. I just want my daily bread. I just want the provision, because I want my dependence on you. And each time we go into Panama, I'm often reminded about how provision is just vastly different for some places and some people. As we pull into Lidice, and there's usually some houses that are there. A lot of them are they're kind of cement or brick kind of structures, and those are pretty secure, and they seem to be doing pretty well in those ways. I mean, some will even have some sort of flooring, some is still dirt, but they're solid buildings, and they've got a roof over their heads, and they're pretty secure. And yet there's other buildings that look a little bit different, and there's families of 6 living in places that they don't have the ability to have structure or cement, but it's kind of whatever they can find. And yet when we talk to some people, they'll often tell, like, what do you need? And yet the response is usually, well, we're okay. I've got my daily bread. I've got my daily rice. We've got all that we need. We've got a roof over our heads. And most of the time it doesn't leak. And we've got each other. We've got enough food to kind of make it. And I'm just often reminded, like, man, there's a level of provision that is vastly different from us, for many of us. And it's at these times that I often think too, like, man, I long for that simpler life. Wouldn't it be something to just be like, you know what, I've got all I need here. It's simple, but I've got the people around me. And that's what's important, and that's what they find. And I learned really quickly as we land back in O'Hare and we get into off the runway, we get off the plane, and we start walking, and there are signs everywhere. There's jewelry stations, and there's all these clothing and all this stuff and bags and everything. The prices are ridiculous. And pretty quickly that my line comes over me, and I've got less than I want because there's a lot of things that I want. How quickly we forget. And so may our prayer be, God, would you just give me my portion? Let me be satisfied. Let me be joyful. Let me be content and peaceful with not having too much, not having too little, but having just the right amount. And so this week, as I'm wrestling this, I'm like, well, what's the action step for this? How do we find something to actionable for this? And here's my thought. Are we grateful for the provision that God already has given us? Are we grateful if we can say, but God, I've got more than I need? So this week, I've been thanking God for heat in my house when I know others may not have it or when it goes out. I've been thanking God each morning, the last 2 in particular, when I turn the faucet on and the water works. It was 3 days ago, it didn't. And yet, at that point, I was extremely grateful that no pipes burst and all we needed was a hairdryer to be able to thaw some things. I've been extremely grateful when the car turns over and starts, that the heat works in the car this week. And when I opened my fridge this morning, there's food in it. I've got clothes on my back. There's so much that I'm just going, man, how often do I take that for granted? So God, may we be people who are grateful that you provide. Maybe not as much as I want, but certainly more than I need. Now, if we've taken care of our priorities, if we know we're trusting him with our provision, the next thing we want to do is deal with the preparation. We want to be thinking ahead. We can be planning for the future. Now, sometimes people get in this point of going, hey, but doesn't Scripture say, like, don't worry about tomorrow? Today has enough worries for itself. And just, God takes care of the birds. He'll take care of you. He takes care of the lilies. You'll be fine. Just worry about today. Well, yeah, and yet there's also Scripture that will say, and yet with God, with open hands, be trusting him and working with him for preparation for the future. And so Proverbs 21:5 is going to tell us about the wisdom that comes from that. The plans of the diligent certainly lead to advantage, but everyone who is in a hurry certainly comes to poverty. See, these plans, it's talking about having some foresight, having some direction, having a purpose. And so we plan ahead with purpose. And these plans, purpose of the diligent. This diligence, it means to be steady. It means to have this little by little, like to continue to do something, just little by little. I'm going to be having plans. I'm going to be consistent over time. And when I'm consistent over time, that certainly leads to advantage. Now, this advantage can be this margin. It can mean I've got more than enough. Like I've created this space where I'm not in need anymore. There's gain there. And then the contrast, there's difference. It's the plans of the diligent versus those who are in a hurry. Now, this hurry can be hasty. It means, man, I'm impulsive. and make quick decisions financially. And they're often driven by things like fear. Like, oh, I'm really scared that this is going to happen, so I got to do this really quick. And we see that kind of reaction in our world. Or we're driven by comparison. Oh, neighbor pulls in with a new car. I need a new car. I mean, we see some of this stuff, and we're like, man, I got to keep up. So when we're driven by things like that, we're going to make impulsive decisions. We're going to make hurried decisions. And that certainly comes to poverty. And now, not just poverty because we have less finances because we're spending them on those things, but this can be, again, poverty of margin, and there's also a sense of poverty of peace within us. Poverty of stability, meaning we're going to create an instability, and this is no matter what we make as far as an income. If we're going to be hasty, if we're going to be in a hurry, we will spend beyond our means, and we'll put ourselves in some level of poverty that comes with it. I'm fortunate that every now and then I listen to smart people. And one of those times came right when we got married, we met with a buddy of mine who's a financial planner. And he started to try to get us on a good path. And one of the things that he told us back then was he said, hey, now you two are both, we're dinks, we're making money, we have double income coming in, and now that you're going to be starting to set a budget, just give me a little chunk of what you make every month and forget about it. And he's like, just let me invest it, just forget about this. So when you're planning a budget, just act like you've got this little bit less, so like you're not going to be like ultimately spending it. Because he said, here's the nature of everybody. Whatever we take in, we're going to spend. So act like you take in a little bit less and just give me this. So fast forward to a couple of years ago. We're trying to do what I'll call a small bathroom renovation, update a little bit. And when we pulled down the vent over the shower, and we realized that the vent's actually not connected to the vent that takes it out of the house, but it's just blowing right up against the inside of the roof. So the inside of the roof is moisture-filled. It's rotten, and we need a new roof. And so now we're going, well, we weren't planning for this. What do we do about this? We have to get the roof taken off. We have to get boards replaced. So we start talking, trying to figure out how much this costs. I make a phone call to my financial planner and said, hey, Matt, what do we do? I remember we did something about giving you a little bit every month, this rainy day fund. It's raining. What do we do about this? He said, okay, here's what we do. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and in 24 hours, it'll be in your account. Wow. And some people can say, like, hey, don't you just trust God? I mean, don't you trust Him to provide? Like, if something like that happens, He trusted? And I think what God's saying is, yeah, I prepared you for this for the last 20 years. Trust me with this. I've given you all that you need, so steward it well. So be prepared for something in the future that we either can or cannot see. And so it's the preparation that we make that's not going against God's word, but it's working with Him. The plans of the diligent, there comes advantage to that. And so what do we do with this one? How do we make some preparations for the future? Well, we might leave here, and some of it might be like, man, we just need to look back and see how we're doing. We need to actually track a budget. Maybe we haven't done it ever. Maybe we need one for the first time. Maybe we haven't reviewed it in a long time. Maybe it's time to review that. Maybe it's time to look at last month's spreadsheet. Because, hey, I'll tell you what, I like a latte as much as the rest of you do. Like, man, a caramel macchiato goes a long way on a cold day. But I'll tell you what, they cost a latte of money. And $7 a drink. If we do some math and we do that Monday through Friday on the way to work, $35, multiply that out by 4 weeks in a month, and now we're dropping $140 a month, multiply that by 12 months, we're $1,600, $1,700 on lattes. That's a significant chunk of change. And so when we're going, man, I don't know how much there is for this, and how do we prepare for that? I'm guessing with all of us, we've got some ability to try to analyze and see where we're at. And then maybe it's going, God, we need to set some stuff aside so we have a savings account, or we want to plan ahead for those things that can shift. And as we start to plan, I mean, in young marriage, it's like, how do we plan to have a house? Or then how do we plan to have kids? How do we help them get to college? Or how do we pay for weddings? How do we have a retirement? Like, all this stuff takes preparation. And so we plan for that. And we leave it open to God and say, God, what do you want to do with this? And we trust Him through the process. And then if we've done our priorities, we've got our provision in line, we're making some preparations with God, the last thing we're going to do, let's have some fun and play. Let's play. Now, I have no problem with this one. The 20-year-old in me still comes out readily. And so there's no problem. Nobody has to convince me to play. But I also know that there's some people who are like, man, because you've worked so hard at a lot of these, that even when you have an abundance, it's really hard to spend. And so I would just suggest that there's freedom for all of us in this category. There's freedom in all of us to go, God, are you okay with this decision? If we've done all of this, can we afford the vacation? Can we afford the trip? Can we afford this vehicle? Can we, whatever it is, can we play with this? And this is a camp that can go like, man, God, I feel like you're calling me to be super generous and to pour into this area. This is going to be making a kingdom impact. And we can make some differences in this area as well. If we're just going, God, what do you want from me in this area? We're sticking in Proverbs, chapter 10, verse 22. The writer writes, "It is the blessing of the Lord that makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it." It's the blessing of the Lord. We go to that. Who's the subject of this statement? Give us a clue. It's not us. The Lord is the subject. He's the one who's doing the blessing. So when he's giving us everything, he owns it all. He's giving us to determine how are we going to prioritize it? Are we going to deal with our provisions? How do we deal with our preparations? And then if he's giving it, we can take it as a blessing from him. Now, let me also say blessings come in many ways, shapes, and forms. Again, blessings don't just come in the finances. They come in all different ways. And they come in relationships and health and peace and contentment, all those things. But he wants us to enjoy those because he adds no sorrow to it. And what would be the wealth that would add sorrow to it? Well, that could come wealth that's gained through compromise, compromising our morals. That can be wealth that's gained through greed. Man, I just want more. Or it's wealth that's gained through this cultural pressures of, I just need to keep up. I need to get ahead. There's this line that I wish I could tell you who said it, but it's good either way. I wrote it down a while ago. If it costs you peace, it costs too much. If it costs you peace, it costs too much. If it's peaceful, it's coming from the Lord. If it's not, there's sorrow added to it, it's probably coming from a different place. It might be something we want to avoid. Because God wants to give us these blessings, and he wants us to experience the richness that he provides. And he wants us to play and have no sorrow for it, have no guilt, have no shame, but enjoy what he's given us and go and build a kingdom of work that we can do through what he's given us. I take a step back. In the year 2020, now some of you guys might remember that year, kind of some big stuff were going on. And one of the things that happened that year is we received these stimulus checks from the government. And so at that point, it just seems like, okay, there's an extra check that we've got. Now, what are we going to do with it? And so at the time, we were like, okay, we had some family meetings. And we got the girls involved and said, hey, how do we prioritize this? What are we doing? We're just talking through how we handle finances, use it as a teachable moment, make sure our provisions are taken care of, make sure our preparations are right, and then how are we going to play with this? Now, how are we going to give some and use it in kingdom ways, and then yet there's still this chunk left over? So Tiffany and I are talking about it, and what do we do with this leftover that we feel like we get to play with? And so the first thing I think that came to her mind was, we're in the living room, and she looks at the carpet and is like, well, we've been talking for years about replacing the carpet. Maybe now is finally the time. And we got to talking about it, and I got to thinking about it, and as I'm staring at that carpet, I'm dreaming of new carpeting, and I'm like, oh, that would be nice, and I'm like, after day 2 of dreaming and staring at this, fictional like new carpeting, I'm kind of like, well, that's not going to add a lot of fun to my life. So I had a proposal. Hey, how about we shampoo that carpet, make it look good for a few days, and we go buy a jet ski instead? So after we talked about it, we shampooed that carpet and bought a jet ski. Still enjoying that thing. Where our heart is, I'm going to say, spending time with my family. When the world's shut down, we can enjoy God's creation. Well, let's enjoy it. Let's play a little bit. And we're still enjoying it. And you know what? I felt no sorrow about that decision because I feel like our priorities were in order. Our provision was taken care of. We were having preparations for the future. And so now it's time to play. Now, and I don't say that as like prescription, like, hey, this is what you should do. That's probably a bad way to ever go, if Brian does it, you should do it. But I'm just saying that's what we did. And for some people, they just need like that little nudge to say, and sometimes we just need to enjoy what God's given us. And so we have that freedom when we do things God's way. And when we're not just doing it by the culture, we're going, God, what do you have for us? And see, what happens to us when we face the culture, when we do things according to the 30-second ads that we're going to be seeing in a couple of weeks, when we do things according to the marketing, when we do things according to neighbors, we get this whole thing flipped upside down. See, when I was in my 20s, this was all that mattered. And so what I was going to do is, buy a boat. I'll pay for it someday. So when we have all sorts of fun and spend all my money on the fun, then the preparation doesn't become, hey, what can I build for the future? It becomes, oh no, how do I pay for the past? I'm setting myself up for failure. And so now we're going, well, what's the provision? Well, I'm just a poor college student and all I can afford is ramen noodles because we got nothing left. And prioritize God. God, I got empty pockets. I mean, clearly you haven't given me anything. How am I going to prioritize you? What's left there to give? How am I supposed to contribute to the kingdom when there's nothing left? But when we take the culture and we're pressured and we start to do things that the culture says, we live in this upside-down triangle. But if we want to have financial freedom, then we're going to want to do it God's way, which means we prioritize Him. We say, God, whatever you give me, you own it anyway. I'm going to give you the first fruits. I'm going to tithe to you. I'm going to give it right back to you. And then I'm going to trust you to provide not more, not less, but my share. I'm going to trust you to give me enough. I'm going to trust you to give me my portion. And maybe I'm going to live at my means or below my means. So that way, God, we can go, hey, what do you want for my future? How do we build into a future that's going to be goal-oriented, driven by you, driven by your purpose, that we're going to be stewarding well and be able to move forward into making a kingdom impact? When we do that, man, let's not forget to have some fun and play. God is a God of joy. He's a God of blessing, and He wants us to have fun. And so we're faced with a decision. We're constantly bombarded with a decision because the cultural pressures don't change. So, do we live according to the culture says in an upside-down triangle, or do we try something different? And I've just found in my life, every time I've tried something God's way, it just tends to work out better. And if we do things God's way, I'm convinced that we can have freedom in our finances. So God, I thank you for the truth of your word. And I thank you for the wisdom that you provide and the invitation you have that just brings us to a spot where we can honor you, not just with our finances, but with our whole lives. And so, God, for wherever each one of us is, through your Spirit, would you do a work in us and just give us that next step nudge? Whether it's doing some review, doing some acknowledging, being grateful, setting a budget, whatever that is. Would you be the one leading this, though? Would you be our teacher? Would you be our guide? May we just submit in obedience to you. And we pray this all in your Son's name. And the church said, amen.